In the heart of a forgotten countryside lay Gloamshire, a village shrouded in mist and mystery. The village was nearly abandoned, save for a few elderly residents who spoke in hushed tones about the old railway station on the outskirts. The Gloamshire Station had been closed for decades, its tracks overgrown with weeds, the platform crumbling, and the building itself swallowed by ivy. Yet, despite its disuse, there was a legend that every year, on the eve of the winter solstice, a single train would arrive at midnight. It was said that this train was no ordinary locomotive but a spectral one, carrying the souls of those who had met untimely and gruesome ends. Some believed it to be a portal between the world of the living and the dead, a train that traveled through time and reality itself. The story intrigued Evelyn, a young journalist with a taste for the macabre. She had spent years writing about haunted places and ghost stories, but the legend of Gloamshire Station was one she had never been able to confirm. Determined to uncover the truth, she packed her camera, a flashlight, and a notebook, and set off for the village on the eve of the solstice. As Evelyn arrived in Gloamshire, she was struck by the eerie silence that hung over the place. The few villagers she encountered seemed to avoid her gaze, muttering prayers under their breath as she passed. She made her way to the station, feeling a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the winter cold. The station was just as she had imagined, desolate, with a thick fog rolling in from the surrounding moors. The old clock on the platform had stopped at precisely 11:57, its hands frozen in time. Evelyn set up her camera, focusing on the tracks that disappeared into the darkness. She waited, her breath visible in the freezing air, the only sound the distant hoot of an owl. As the clock struck midnight, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Evelyn's heart raced as she saw a faint light approaching through the fog. The light grew brighter, and soon she could make out the shape of a train, its headlights piercing the darkness. But this was no ordinary train. It was old, its once bright paint now dull and rusted, and its windows opaque, as if covered in decades of grime. The train screeched to a halt in front of her, and for a moment, all was silent. Then, with a groan of ancient metal, the doors slid open. Evelyn hesitated, but her curiosity overpowered her fear. She stepped onto the platform and peered into the carriage. Inside, she saw a collection of passengers, their faces pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow. They were dressed in clothes from various eras, some in Victorian garb, others in tattered uniforms from wars long past, and a few in modern attire. But what struck Evelyn the most was their silence. Not a word was spoken, not a single sound was heard, save for the rhythmic clatter of the train's engine. Feeling a mix of dread and fascination, Evelyn took a step inside the carriage. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the temperature dropped instantly. She moved down the aisle, her footsteps echoing in the quiet. The passengers turned to look at her, their eyes following her every move, but still, they remained silent. Evelyn reached the end of the carriage and noticed a man in a conductor's uniform standing by the door. His face was obscured by shadows, but she could see the glint of his gold pocket watch. He tipped his hat to her and spoke in a voice that sent shivers down her spine. "One-way ticket, miss?" Evelyn tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. The conductor smiled, a cold, knowing smile, and gestured towards the window. Outside, the landscape had changed. Gone were the fog and the moors, replaced by a barren, desolate wasteland under a sky devoid of stars. Panic surged through her as she realized that this was no ordinary train ride. She turned to leave, but the door behind her had vanished. The carriage now stretched on endlessly, filled with more and more passengers, all of them staring at her with vacant eyes. Desperate, Evelyn ran down the aisle, her footsteps quickening as the train picked up speed. She tried door after door, but they were all locked. The conductor's voice echoed through the carriage. "Once aboard, there's no getting off." Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she reached the front of the train. There, in the conductor's cabin, she found a mirror, cracked and dusty. She wiped away the grime and gasped at her reflection. Staring back at her was not the young woman she had known but a pale, ghostly figure, her eyes hollow and lifeless. The train whistle blew, a mournful sound that resonated deep within her. Evelyn realized the truth too late. She had become one of them, another lost soul doomed to ride the spectral train for eternity. As the train sped through the night, Gloamshire Station disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the fog. The village returned to its uneasy quiet, the legend of the midnight train now more than just a story. And in the years to come, when the winter solstice approached, the villagers would warn strangers of the cursed train that arrived at midnight, carrying the souls of those who could never leave. But few listened, and every year, another curious soul would vanish, never to be seen again, save for the glimpse of a hollow face in the window of the last train to Gloamshire.